Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Funeral Consumers Alliance webinar series. For those of you who don't know about the Funeral Consumers Alliance, we are an all-volunteer 501c3 educational organization with a mission to help anyone die with dignity and be able to afford a funeral. If you don't have an affiliate where you're located, just reach out to funerals.org and we will let you know how to get an affiliate started. Okay, to our webinar. I'm so excited to introduce Hunter Beattie for tonight's webinar. Many of you here tonight attended the FCA Biennial Conference last June in Raleigh and got to meet Hunter during one of our field trips. Hunter is not your typical funeral director. He's a pioneer who combines compassion with cutting-edge environmentalism. As the visionary behind Endswell Funeral Home, Hunter has championed Aquamation and dedicated himself to bringing this sustainable option to our community. And he's not just talking about being green, he's doing it. Hunter secured a USDA grant to install solar panels that offset 100% of the electricity used in his Aquamation services. And there's more. He and his wife, Veronica, generously host our monthly death cafe in Endswell's beautiful urn gallery. Hunter, thank you so much, and the stage is all yours.
Thank you, Sarah. And I'm actually not a funeral director. I'm just an idiot who bought a $300,000 Aquamation machine with no background in the industry. But thank you, and thanks to the FCA for having me on. So let me present. Oh my God, I've started at the end. Okay. All right. Well, Veronica's here for technical assistance. Oh, wait. We already need Veronica's support. I need to share my screen. What can you all see?
Everything.
Like too much. Your whole, okay, now we're good. Okay.
Wonderful. Okay, so today we're here to talk about Aquamation, this environmentally conscious option. But I'm going to set the stage a little bit and talk about some other methods of disposition and where Aquamation fits in the larger context of the funeral industry, the history of the funeral industry, and where we're headed. So who am I? Who is this 5'8", 140-pound stud talking about Aquamation tonight? So our background, Veronica and my background. Oh, is that your feedback? Why do I have feedback?
We're getting some really bad feedback.
What would that be from? We don't have anyone else on.
Valerie. There we go.
Okay. Everybody, please mute. Thank you.
Okay, wonderful. So 4 years ago, Veronica and I had never talked about getting into the funeral industry. We've been married for 12 years. Our background was in renewable energy and nonprofit work, and we were always drawn to service work. But in January 2022, I read that Desmond Tutu chose Aquamation instead of cremation. Now, this is Desmond Tutu, Archbishop of Cape Town, Nobel Prize winner, anti-apartheid activist, and climate activist. And he chose Aquamation rather than cremation. He chose to have his body dissolved rather than burned after death. Now, I had never heard of it before. So I ran home, told Veronica all about it, and 2 weeks later, we put a deposit on this Aquamation machine, again, without any background in the industry. Now, we knew we wanted something modern and different and artsy. This is not what we wanted. We did not want maroon carpet, floral wallpaper, compressed fiberboard caskets, and a Reader's Digest on the church pew. Nor did we want anything garish, gaudy, the pomp and the circumstance and the shiny gold leaf. We wanted something different. So we created this modern, eco-friendly funeral home, this urn gallery with urns made by local artists. And our goal is to create a space for people to come together where we provide educational opportunities, death cafes, presentations, and workshops so people can talk more openly and honestly about death and dying and how they want to be treated and, relevant to today, what they want done with their bodies. So why do we have methods of disposition? Why do we even have a funeral industry at all? Why can't we keep the body, as some cultures have tried to do before? Well, our bodies break down after death. In the absence of cellular respiration, our cells are deprived of oxygen. They become acidic, they start to break down, and the bacteria in our gut, 90% of which is anaerobic, they thrive in the absence of oxygen, and they start to break down and liquefy the soft tissue, and ultimately the body will skeletonize. This is gross. This is something that smells bad as the body is releasing putrescine and cadaverine. This is not something for families to see. So this is why we have methods of disposition. Now, some cultures have attempted to preserve the bodies. The Chinchorro culture in the Atacama Desert in present-day Chile and Peru, they were preserving people in 5000 BC with natrium. And this natrium, this naturally occurring mineral salt and the high altitude led to natural Chinchorro mummies, and then they incorporated it into their cultural practices. You all obviously know about Egyptian mummification using natron, again, salt. Many of you know that, the chemical symbol for sodium is Na. It comes from natrium. But they would wash the body in palm wine and spices and preserve the body. Now, today, we have Indonesia's Toraja community who preserve people. They don't consider their loved ones to be dead. They consider them to be sick or sleeping, and they bring them out for special occasions, holidays, events. And if this seems weird, if you can't quite maintain a bit of cultural relativism here, and this seems a little bit weird, just consider that people are just jogging down the street wearing granny's calcium phosphate around their neck or keeping a lock of hair or wearing fingerprint jewelry. Ashes can be incorporated into vinyl records or a coral reef or shot up into space. So there are all of these ways in which we try to keep someone still with us in a physical form. And embalming. And yes, Veronica is responsible for the pickle jars on the embalming slide, but most of us are pretty familiar with how embalming works. But let's just dial it back for 1 minute and talk about where this began. What were we doing before human composting and aquamation and cremation and embalming? We were burying typically in our community on the family farm. In the pre-industrial and home-based care era in America, families and communities were caring for their loved ones. There were natural burials, home vigils, and religious rites. People were lowered into the grave on the lower 40 of the family property. They were carried there by their loved ones. This was natural, this was environmentally friendly, and it was very, very practical. Now, in the Civil War, Union soldiers were dying in the South, and the railroads refused to transport their bodies up north because they were decomposing. So we started using creosote, alcohol, turpentine, and arsenic to preserve their bodies so the railroads would take them back up and their families could see them again. And then this took off as a cultural practice. If you really loved Aunt Bessie, you would preserve her body and send her to heaven intact. And it was even incorporated into Christian notions of bodily resurrection. On your left, you'll see an embalming machine. On your right, a urinal. They put formaldehyde in the body now instead of arsenic. The blood that they drain has to go somewhere. It goes into the sewer system, but it first enters through the urinal. Many people don't know that, but when we get to our later topic of aquamation and people ask, where does the liquid go? We always want people to be aware of how these other methods of disposition work. So at its peak in the 1950s to 1980s, about 80% or more of people who were buried were embalmed first, even though in many cases it's not necessary if you are having a burial, a viewing, a visitation, or a funeral within 2 weeks of death. And that's because funeral homes keep the body cold with refrigeration. So embalming is unnecessary most of the time. And this multi-billion-dollar industry has risen. Now, I say that it's hard to not achieve a multi-billion-dollar industry in a country with 300 million people. Cheese is a multi-billion-dollar industry. Chocolate, lawn care, there are a lot of multi-billion-dollar industries. However, this casket in front of you probably cost someone $8,000. There's AstroTurf. People can easily spend $12,000 to $15,000 on these elaborate funerals. This is where funeral care is in the United States right now, with the exception of these emerging trends like aquamation that we will get to momentarily. So, just to recap, decomposition is why we have disposition. Every culture has created a way to respond. We have burial, we have embalming, cremation, aquamation, human composting, sky burial, burial at sea. These funeral practices are society's solutions to a biological reality. The body breaks down after death, and we have to do something with it. Veronica's just told me to slow down a bit, so I'm just going to take a breath. You all can do the same if I've been too fast and intense so far. So, before we talk about aquamation, I think it's very important to start off by talking about cremation. It's very hard to understand why we're aquamating. Why are we dissolving a body unless you understand how cremation works? So with cremation, the body is heated to 1400 to 1800 degrees. Now, sometimes there's direct flame involved. Other times we're just really energizing the atmospheric gases within the cremation chamber. These atmospheric gases that are harmless at standard atmospheric temperature and pressure, they become weaponized and they break apart the soft tissue, rapidly desiccating and combusting it. And it goes up through the chimney in the form of soot and toxic gases. A lot of people wonder if cremation is an offender environmentally because of the carbon dioxide emission. It's not really the main reason why cremation is an offender environmentally. It's all of the toxic and carcinogenic gases emitted during the combustion process. Now, there is a common misconception. Many of you with the FCA probably know this already, but I'll mention it. Cremation and aquamation reduce the body to rigid bone fragments, not ashes as we think of campfire ash. By law, funeral homes, crematoriums, aquamation facilities have to break down these bone remains into a dust, which is basically just calcium phosphate, and that's what people receive in an urn. That is not what cremation or aquamation does directly to the body. The body has to be further broken down by a cremulator, and I'll show you what that looks like in a moment. So, in honor of Veronica, trigger warning, I'm going to show you what cremation looks like. So this is what cremation looks like. You see this oven lined with fire brick. It's been heated to 1400 to 1800 degrees. And in the bottom right, you'll see what the bone remains look like after the cremation process. So this is not ash as we commonly think of ash. These are rigid pieces of bone. And again, by law, they have to be broken down into ashes, cremains, bone dust. This is the device that is used to break them down. They all look a little bit different, but this is a cremulator, a bone grinder. You'll find this at any aquamation facility and any crematorium in the United States. They use it to break the bones down into the dust you see on your right. Now, cremation was introduced in the late 1800s. There was strong opposition. It interfered with Christian principles of bodily resurrection. It was viewed as desecration of the body. But obviously, they had their way of marketing it. They marketed it as sanitary, a modern alternative. And you'll see similar marketing in all of these newer methods of disposition as people are adjusting to yet another option. But the Catholic Church ended up lifting its ban on cremation in 1963. It's still not the preferred method of disposition among Catholics, but this is growing in popularity. Over 60% of people in the United States are now choosing cremation. It's the predominant form of disposition, and it's projected to rise to about 80% by 2040. So here's a chart. You'll see introduced in the late 1800s, 1% at the turn of the century, 3% in 1950, skyrocketing up to an estimated 80% of people choosing cremation by 2040. So I point this out because, again, it's important to understand this draw for cremation, the benefits of it, but this was met with great opposition, and it is now the predominant form of disposition in the United States. So some of the benefits: low cost. We've seen a proliferation of high volume crematoriums in the United States. These are cremation facilities that cremate between 150 and 250 people per month, and they are very low cost. You can get a direct cremation for as little as $1,000, or you can get a direct cremation for $5,000. And we'll talk about costs at the end, but to be clear, the ashes you get back with the $5,000 cremation, they're not higher quality than the ones with the $1,000 cremation. You're paying for a particular funeral home and the quality of service and support you're getting, like when you work with a general contractor or in any other industry. So some of the benefits: reduced land use, no embalming chemicals, and it typically eliminates the need for caskets and burial vaults. Again, circling back to what I mentioned in the beginning, there are concerns with air pollution. It's the release of carbon dioxide, other pollutants. Any mercury dental fillings are released into the atmosphere with cremation. Plastic implants in the body, mesh from hernia repair, components of a hip replacement. All of those endocrine disrupting plastic chemicals are sent up through the chimney into the air that we breathe. So that's the main reason why cremation is a bit of an offender environmentally, in addition to the dependency on natural gas, a fossil fuel. All right, breathe. Still going too quickly, Veronica. Yes, Veronica says yes. All right, but it's because they're here to learn about aquamation, and we have arrived. Drink break?
Water.
It's water. It's not aquamation fluid, I promise. All right. So, aquamation is mostly known as alkaline hydrolysis. Aquamation is actually a trademark term, trademarked by this company called BioResponse Solutions. We purchased our equipment from BioResponse Solutions. They trademarked the term aquamation. It is pretty much the most common word you'll hear to refer to it, but the chemical process is called alkaline hydrolysis. And when it's legislated in a new state, this is typically what they're referring to is when they legislated alkaline hydrolysis. So alkaline hydrolysis was first patented in 1888 and used in agriculture to convert animal waste, animal byproducts, into fertilizer because of the nutrient-rich solution that it produces. It was adopted by the University of Florida in 1995 as part of their anatomical gift program. You donated your body for medical research, you were aquamated afterwards instead of cremated. Legalized in Minnesota in 2003, and then shortly thereafter, the Mayo Clinic also offered aquamation for their anatomical gift program. The first funeral home was Edwards Funeral Home in Ohio in 2011. So here is where it's legal. About 30 states. It tends to change a little bit year over year. It's not illegal for any particular reason other than that it has not been legislated yet. The consumer hasn't brought it before the funeral board or the legislature. A funeral home hasn't requested that it become legal. There is a little bit of opposition from the Catholic Church and the casket industry, but I would anticipate in the next decade, you'll probably see aquamation legalized almost everywhere in the United States. So, there are a variety of names that you will encounter when it comes to alkaline hydrolysis and aquamation. You have aqua cremation, you have water cremation, resomation in the UK, biocremation, and hydrocremation. All of these refer to the same process that we're talking about today, alkaline hydrolysis. You will hear this marketed in a variety of ways. It's very spa-like. It's natural, it's peaceful, it's gentle, it's flame-free, lower temperature, a softer, gentle alternative to cremation. There's a lot of marketing here. And some of this is true, and we'll talk about that momentarily. But a lot of it really is just the funeral home trying to introduce this to the consumer. But this is how you will see Aquamation positioned typically when you're looking at this method of disposition. So the reality. And Veronica, how do I hide this little bar at the bottom? Is that good? No.
You're good.
Just continue? Okay. It's very casual here. We're hanging out at the funeral home late at night as usual. All right. So the reality, even though you'll see it advertised as gentle, tranquil, eco-friendly, like the baptism rather than burning in hell, Aquamation is just an alternative to fire cremation that uses less energy and doesn't emit toxic gases. It's simply another disposition option. It aligns with some people's values. It conflicts with other people's values. No death care method has universal approval. And Veronica. Okay. So this is an example of a cremation chamber on your left and an aquamation chamber on your right. This aquamation chamber looks a little bit different than ours, but essentially what I want you to understand here is that these are mechanical processes. You're going to see this giant oven on your left lined with fire brick. The body is combusted. The soft tissue goes up through the chimney. The goal is to remove the part of the body that breaks down after death so something that is shelf stable can be returned to the family. On your right, you'll see this aquamation chamber. The goal is the same, to remove the part of the body that breaks down after death, the soft tissue, so we can return bone dust to the family. Now, what is it? What are we actually doing here? We're using heated water and potassium hydroxide. It's this highly alkaline environment. We're breaking proteins, fats, and DNA, and we're essentially converting the carbohydrates, fats, and proteins that make up the soft tissue into sugars, salts, amino acids, and peptides. So this is a chemical process. And I like to point out to people that this is very similar to how the body breaks down during natural burial in the soil. The soft tissue is converted into sugar, salts, amino acids, and peptides. So we're using aquamation, alkaline hydrolysis, to mimic that process in a much shorter period of time. So the body is placed into the vessel. We add enough KOH, enough potassium hydroxide, to make about a 95% water, 5% KOH solution. The vessel fills up with water, and this water circulates around the body. And again, what's happening is that these carbohydrates, fats, and proteins are being broken down into smaller constituent parts, and what is left behind are bone remains. So the chemistry here, this base catalyzed hydrolysis, breaks molecular bonds. We have hydroxide ions dismantling the tissue structure. The fats undergo saponification, so we are kind of making soap. We don't sell it here at Endswell. We give it to Sarah Williams at the FCA. And water and alkalinity dissolve the soft tissue at the molecular level. But again, we are mimicking this very natural process of the body breaking down in the soil just in 4 to 8 hours rather than in, let's say, 6 to 9 months with green burial. Where does the liquid go? The most common question we get. So I like to explain this in the context of fire cremation. When you're removing this part of the body that breaks down after death, the soft tissue, it has to go somewhere. With fire cremation, it's going up through the chimney in the form of soot and toxic and carcinogenic gases. It doesn't soar to the heavens. I think because it disappears and dissipates, people don't really think about it having an impact. But this soot that goes up through the chimney, it ultimately settles on the rooftops, on the streets. It's washed away into the stormwater system. It's ultimately going to the same place that we're sending the liquid after aquamation. We send it directly to the water treatment facility. And one thing I like to point out to people is that there's still a lot of residual alkalinity in this solution. Most water treatment facilities add potassium or sodium hydroxide when they're treating the water to mitigate the acid being produced as bacteria are breaking down our waste. So this water that we're sending to them is actually beneficial to their system. And then after it's treated at the water treatment facility, it's released into, in our area, the Eno River watershed. So these amino acids are becoming a part of the ecosystem again, rather than soot going up through the chimney. So that's another benefit of aquamation. So on your left, you'll see what the bone remains typically look like after the process. You saw that other slide where you could see the charring of the fire cremation. With aquamation, the bones tend to be white, and the bone dust, the calcium phosphate, tends to be white as well, devoid of any of the carcinogenic byproducts of combustion because we're not burning the body, so the bone remains are white instead of charred or gray or brown. Now, I will note, I will admit, this slide was provided to me by BioResponse Solutions. They manufacture the Aquamation machine. I feel like they darkened the ashes just a little bit to make this argument. I have seen a lot of cremated remains at this point. They can be this dark. They tend to be a little bit lighter, but this still is a good representation of what cremated remains look like versus aquamated remains. We tend to return this fine white powder that looks like bleached flour. So, to review some of the benefits of aquamation, we have no direct greenhouse gas emissions. We're still dependent on electricity to power the machine, but as Sarah mentioned, we have this new 50 kilowatt solar array that offsets all of the electrical usage. This is possible with aquamation, and it's not possible with fire cremation because they're dependent on natural gas. So there's no direct greenhouse gas emissions, no toxins that are products of combustion, no cross-contamination of ashes. Now, that can be a very big deal and very noticeable in the high-volume crematoriums. With aquamation, we're powering on the machine and then we power it off when we remove the bone remains. We let it cool down. We have to in order to remove them. With fire cremation, they'll leave the cremation chamber on all day. It's body in, body out. At the high volume firms, there can be significant cross-contamination with other people's remains. So that's one advantage of aquamation. And for better or for worse, you get about 30% more. And that's because we don't lose any to the chimney effect of the crematorium. Particularly noticeable when someone has osteoporosis or a really delicate bone structure. Increasingly, Endswell is helping a lot of people who have experienced infant or fetal loss. We always maintain cultural relativism and values neutrality when we're talking about these methods of disposition. We never say one is better than the other, but when it comes to infant or fetal loss, aquamation can return ashes in cases that fire cremation just can't because it is a lower temperature process. There's no chimney effect. So we do recommend aquamation for infant or fetal loss. So who chooses this? We've got environmentally conscious people and planners, people who are doing their research and they care about their carbon footprint. This becomes a part of their legacy and their values. It becomes a very intentional choice. People who are uncomfortable with fire. We have a lot of people who just don't like the idea of fire. There may be a religious component to that, or they just think that burning the body at 1800 degrees sounds violent. There's a lot of water symbolism. There are people who research everything and read about every method of disposition, and they're scientists and they come in and they nerd out on this process. And then people who say there has to be another way, there has to be a more environmentally friendly option. And we have firefighters, we have sailors, we have hippy dippy Pisces water signs. We have a variety of people who choose this option because it feels meaningful and intentional to them. So some of the ways that water and aquamation has meaning to people, it represents purification, renewal, rebirth, transformation. There's tahara, this ritual washing of by the Havra Kadisha in the synagogue, Christian baptism, Islamic purification practices, sacred rivers and Hindu traditions. Water has always carried symbolic weight. So, who does not choose Aquamation? People who just hear about it and maybe they don't want to take the time to think about how cremation works or how embalming works. It sounds icky. It feels unnatural. They don't like thinking about it. They think you get liquid back. They ask if we're dissolving people. And the answer is basically yes. Breaking Bad, is this in a bathtub? Soylent Green, they're flushing Granny down the drain. There are a variety of reasons why this doesn't resonate with people. And again, as a funeral homeowner, not a funeral director yet, we always want to point out that whatever method of disposition you choose, there's no right or wrong answer. This choice is driven by personal, cultural, and religious preferences. So the choice, your choice, is whatever's right for you, whatever aligns with your budget and with your values. And this is right for some people and not right for everyone. So there are religious concerns as well. Some traditions strongly prefer natural burial. Most of the Jewish families we help choose natural burial. Most of the Hindu families we help choose fire cremation because it's most similar to burning on a funeral pyre. And then many people hold this idea that full body integrity, that this principle of resurrection of the body, the keeping the body intact is very important. And in 2023, the Catholic Church did issue a ruling that basically said they did not believe that aquamation and human composting were respectful ways of disposing of the body. So most of the Catholics we help do not choose it. We've had a few people cross over. So the conclusion here is what happens to the body can have spiritual and religious implications. The neophobes. These are some other people who don't choose it. I think we've noticed this tendency to scrutinize something that is new and different more than the thing we think we're familiar with. And we see that all the time when people come in here and they don't really want to learn about aquamation. It just makes people feel uncomfortable. They trust what's familiar. A lot of people think we should just return to the practices of our ancestors, and we'll cover that in a moment. But we've got a lot of people who are just afraid of this or distrusting of it because it's new and they don't understand it. Now, there is some opposition from an unexpected place. We do encounter a lot of opposition from natural burial advocates. There's this preference for ancestral practices, this suspicion of new technology, and then concerns about greenwashing, which are legitimate. You find greenwashing all over the place with green burial, with human composting, with aquamation, and pretty much any industry. Death care has internal politics. The human composting people don't like the aquamation people. The aquamation people don't like the green burial people. You will find that. But again, it's always important to remember that this choice is about your personal, cultural, and religious preferences. It's about what's right for you. Oh, what is greenwashing? It's this tendency to paint something as eco-friendly. It might be a bamboo toothbrush that you have Mr. Jeff Bezos deliver to your home one evening that's not necessarily better for the environment because of the way it's made or because you had Mr. Jeff Bezos bring it to your home and you didn't order anything else. It's this idea that all of these things we're calling eco-friendly. And when you actually dive into the carbon footprint, it may not be better for the environment. So again, you'll find that all over the place in any industry that's claiming to be green or grass-fed or free range. There's a lot of terminology that you'll hear with greenwashing. So the reality, though, when you calculate environmental impact seriously, Transportation matters, infrastructure matters, consumer behavior matters. Nothing is perfectly sustainable. There's no zero impact death. Very little that we do each day is actually good for the environment. Green burial and aquamation, they're not good for the environment. They're just less bad than traditional burial or fire cremation. There's an environmental impact here of everything we do in our lives, and that includes green burial and aquamation. You've got to transport people to the aquamation facility. They've got to manufacture potassium hydroxide, which is used during the process. There's an electrical usage. There's the diesel-powered heavy machinery to dig the grave at the Green Burial Cemetery that may be located 50 miles from an urban area, and there's a carbon footprint associated with transporting the body, as well as all the people coming for the graveside service there. So when you really dig into this, there are a lot of details in terms of carbon footprint that are worth exploring. And again, that's why we say do the research, meet with different funeral homes, or put a plan in place that doesn't involve working with a funeral home, but choose the option that feels right for you and your family. So again, going to go back and recap a little bit. Aquamation, it uses less energy. It reduces carbon emission. No mercury dental fillings, no plastic implants. It is considered a more natural way than fire, than incineration, because we're mimicking this process of natural burial. For better or for worse, there are more ashes, and it does avoid the impact of land use, unlike traditional burial. So some of the disposition options that are available to you all today, you've got green natural burial, conventional burial with embalming, cremation, aquamation, human composting, and anatomical gift programs, which typically involve fire cremation. But these are all options for you all to consider, and I would encourage you to reflect on all of them and choose what feels right for you. These trends, though, that we're seeing, this recompose, terramation, human composting, aquamation, alkaline hydrolysis, a lot of it's driven by environmental concerns, shifting consumer preferences, and I think this effort to reclaim death care from the traditional funeral industry. Because when we started embalming, we suddenly needed specialists who had access to arsenic then, formaldehyde now, people who understood the arterial network of the body. We lost this. We lost it to funeral professionals, and families and communities stopped caring for their loved ones at home after death. So we're seeing a big push towards do-it-yourself funerals, natural burial, conservation burial, and options that are more environmentally friendly, like human composting and aquamation. Lastly, before we get to questions, I will briefly talk about costs. Hank, Sarah, got the GPL right here, right? Compliant. I'm not going to talk about our costs unless someone asks about them, but what I mentioned before with respect to fire cremation, you can get a fire cremation for anywhere between $1,000 and $5,000. You find the same spectrum with aquamation. There's a provider in Alabama who I think charges about $2,000 for aquamation. There's a provider in Colorado who charges $6,000 for aquamation. So again, you're paying for the place, the funeral home that you're working with, even more so than you're paying for a particular method of disposition. So we tell people, read Google reviews, ask hospice nurses and social workers, ask people in your community who have worked with another funeral home, get a recommendation, meet with multiple funeral homes, always leave with a GPL, really work with funeral homes that publish their GPL online, and then talk to your family and friends and choose an option that's right for you. All right, questions. Well, I'm glad I rushed through, Veronica. It's 8:42. All right. Okay.
Hunter, that was marvelous.